Namaste. So, today, as part of Thoughts and Aphorisms, we have a very fascinating subject. I think two subjects universally fascinate everyone, and one is death, and the other is love. So, we see in Savitri the whole battle between love and death, and the reason is that death divides. It divides the body from the soul, divides this world and that world, whereas love unites and joins. So we see them as mutual opponents, and ultimately, just as death draws a gulf between matter and the spirit, love is the power that joins the matter and spirit. This is its ultimate purpose. So here is an aphorism on which we will take up. It is from JNANA, section JNANA. It's aphorism number 11. Immortality is not the survival of the mental personality after death, though that also is true, but the waking position of the unborn and deathless self, of which body is only an instrument and a shadow. So we see here there are three very clear terms that should be in the uses. One is the mental personality, the second is the unborn self, and the third is the body. So most of us, when we think about immortality, we think body. So as if there is nothing else other than the body, and therefore when the body shows signs of death and starts disintegrating and decomposing, we say that the person is dead. But actually, from the higher standpoint, there is no death. That's how the mother puts it. And it's the experience of anyone who has discovered the immortal self within oneself. So this is one of the secrets, as the Kathopanishad puts it, which even the gods do not know. Because that's how when Nachiketa asks that, some say that not all is over with death, and some say that there is nothing after death. So which of them is true? And Yam tells him that don't ask this question because even the gods do not know. So, of course, why the gods do not know? Because gods are immortal, but they do not know what happens after death with regard to the survival of the individual, because in us there is something which gods do not have. That is the great paradox, and that is the psychic being, the essence of the Supreme, a portion of the Divine Mother, Para Prakriti Jiva Bhuta, which survives. And not only survives, it grows stronger in the journey from life to life. So, when immortality is spoken about, because we see these different belief systems, we can briefly touch upon it. So, there are certain belief systems which say that there is a soul. They don't use the word soul, naturally, they use their own words. But there is no rebirth. So, the question about that is then, what is the soul doing with one career? Does it enter into the body only to get reward and punishment? Sometimes the reward is an eternal dwelling in heaven and an eternal damnation in hell, which is obviously absurd. So, survival of something which we may call as the individual soul and rebirth, they go hand in hand. And the whole purpose of the soul entering into creation is that it must grow as a seed grows to the fullness of the tree. That is the idea of a seed. So, what does a seed do? It grows. It will eventually grow into whatever the seed is of. So, it cannot grow in one life, because to grow it needs many experiences. And therefore, in one life, there is a limitation. It experiences those things, then comes back in another life a little more grown, and little more grown, a little more grown. So, first thing is that there is a constant progression. There is no retrogression, that the way we look at life as reward and punishment, that is not how the divine looks at life. If he looked at it like that, there will be no hope. But as a constant growth. Now, in this process of constant growth, this soul begins to put out its divine possibilities, which is what becomes the psychic personality or the spiritual individual, which becomes more and more, the psychic being is the real center for our individuality. But as always happens, we have those stories where the baby prince is in the Palana cradle and the king is not there, so in his absence, the manager or the mantri, he is governing the throne and he tries all kinds of ways and means that this prince may either never grow into the king, he is killed or banished, something or the other he tries. So also with us, this true individuality, which is the soul, is covered by what we believe is our individuality, which is the ego. Ego individuality is a construct. In fact, it's hardly an individuality. It's usually shaped by all the forces. We hear certain things. There is something which the society expects of us, some things which a religion expects of us, something which we have thought about, and we call this entire thing as me. Now, this me, does it really survive? Now, Sri Aurobindo has used a very paradoxical term. He says, though that also is true with regard to the mental personality. So, usually, however, this ego individuality or the surface personality, which we put on our visiting cards, which we are so proud about, it dissolves. It cannot continue. It is one life experience, and there is no guarantee that a king in this life will not become not only a subject but maybe a serf in another life. It's just a question of the need of a certain kind of experience. So, one thing we must know, this which we call as our ego personality, which is normally driven by the vital and the mind, that does not survive. But Sri Aurobindo says, though that is also possible. So, when does it become possible? When even within this ego structure, there is a true individuality, even though the soul has not emerged in the forefront. But there is a true mental personality. The mind picks up a highest thought and builds the entire life around it. And in that life, the psychic can put a spark of immortal life. So there are beings like that. Swami Vivekananda, for example, who continues to influence the minds of people even after withdrawal. We have examples of in the ashram context. A.B. Purani, when he left the body, the mother says his higher intellect has united with Sri Aurobindo. So, always as a mental personality, he continues to remain one with the Lord, with the divine. So, there is no way it can be dissolved. And that can continue to influence an act. Amrita, he said, I want to keep my that part in him which was full of bhakti intact after his departure so that I can help others who are seekers. But these are rare exceptional cases. For most of us it dissolves because most of us in the name of individuality are merely a chaos. It's a khichdi, and if a khichdi is well cooked it's still okay. It's a badly cooked khichdi where there are all kinds of things from everywhere and they've been put together. So khichdi making is an art. You can't just put everything together and put on fire and say this is khichdi. So the mother starts commentary with this background. She says there are three statements here which have raised questions. First, what is the mental personality? Because Sri Aurobindo says immortality is not the survival of the mental personality after death, though that also is true. So she says in each human being, the body is animated by the vital being and governed or partially governed by a mental being. So vital being gives it the force of life. Without the vital being, it's as good as dead. Even when the vital being sinks, supposing there is depression, somebody is feeling sad. So what happens? The vital being is in revolt. It says, I will not cooperate. So what do people experience? No energy. Although they have all the energy, nothing has happened. But that particular day, that particular moment, that particular week, they feel there is no energy. And even many of these illnesses like the viruses, the forces behind them, they actually draw away the vital energy. There are people who will do that. There are people who take away the vital energy and one feels as good as or as bad as half dead. So it's the vital energy that gives the force of life to the body. But then force of life is not enough. Somebody has to govern it. So we have the image in the Gita that there are the steeds, 5 horses, and then there is the rein. So the rein is the mind and the one who holds the reins is the buddhi, higher intellect. So the 5 horses are the energy of life, the Panch Pran, which is, of course, driven normally. It drives the senses into action. So they are the 5-fold prana. But this must be held by the mind. If the mind doesn't hold it, govern it, then they will take the rider anywhere. Imagine if one driver is driving the car and he cannot control the steering, the car is controlling him. So it is dangerous situation if horses are running on their own way. So there are 3 things that she is revealing to us. There is the body, there is the vital being which gives the life force, and there is the mental being which governs or is expected to govern. Normally what happens, the driver has gone off to sleep. So the mental being is hardly, it doesn't know how to really drive, and it says doesn't matter, autopilot, whatever is happening is happening. This is a general rule. But the extent to which the mental being is formed and individualized varies greatly from one individual to the next. So the first step for self-mastery is that the mental being must be individualized. Meaning thereby, that's where the significance of choice is. So in Kathopanishad, Yama tells Nachiketa. Nachiketa insists, no, you tell me. I want to know about the secret of immortality. So then he is very happy and he says that you have chosen the Shreyas over Preyas. So Preyas is simply, it's no choice but being driven by the vital. Shreyas means what is good, what is really noble, what is worthy of me. So that's where the mind comes in. So there are very few people in whom the mind can govern the outer personality. And in ancient India, these people were called as Arya. It had nothing to do with geography. Even Mandodari at one point of time tells Ravana, hey Arya, Tara, Vali's wife, communicates to him once, Arya, why are you doing something which is anarya? So Arya and Dravidian, they were not two opposites. Dravid could apply to the entire Indian peninsula because Dravid is a land surrounded on 3 sides. It's a literal Sanskrit term for peninsula. So it was Arya and Anarya. So if you do Anarya Acharan, means you are driven by senses and the vital. That's what it meant psychologically. That this is an Anarya way of life, which was Swachhand way of life. But our way of life was where there was an effort towards mastery. Because the mind was developed, the intellect was developed, and of course, if there could be a spiritual development. So our were those who were striving towards self-mastery. So the mother brings out that distinction in her own way. She says this is the general rule, but in some people the mental being is formed and individualized. What she means by formed is that there is a clarity. The mind understands where it wants to go, how it wants to make its choices. There are a lot of people who don't even know. I have seen people write in old age. They don't know what is their aim. Many of them take it that, bringing up my children is my aim. And when children fly off, then it's grandchildren. So those who are lucky don't have grandchildren, I must say. Because then they are freed. If you have a grandchild and if you are attached, then your whole life is first children, then grandchildren. And that's the end of the story. So the goal is not clear. But formed mental being means it's clear about what it wants from life. It makes conscious choices and it's not driven by the vital. So she says this varies from individual to the next. In the great mass of human beings, the mind is something fluid, which has no organization of its own, and therefore it is not a personality. So such a mind is driven by WhatsApp Gyan. So very often all kinds of things go on, By WhatsApp Gyan, I mean the whole kind of ideas. See, people go to that extent. I have sometimes heard ridiculous things. Lakshman ne rekha bana diya tha. Lakshman had made a rekha. He wanted to tell that women should not step out. So you have to tell them there is no incidence of Lakshman rekha in Valmiki Ramayana. There is nothing like Lakshman rekha in Valmiki Ramayana. So where did this Lakshman rekha come from? One of the Ramayana does mention it. If I am not mistaken, probably Ramcharitmanas mentions it. But in the original Ramayana, there is no Lakshman rekha. So many, they don't even do a fact check. Forget about analyzing a data, then you understand what is that Lakshman Rekha, what is that Rekha of Maryada which is inside us. It's not something which is tangible and visible. So, to that extent, that we don't even try to confirm whether a thing is true or not, in the field of health, in every field. So, this is how the mind is fluid. Fluid mind means anything from anywhere, and it begins to believe it. It's very gullible. It doesn't process things by its own intelligence and try to understand. For instance, there are a lot of people who believe that God rewards and punishes. Nobody raises a question that really, I mean, if he rewards and punishes, where will a human being go? So, but we carry these belief systems because the mind likes to ready-made product, put it over, it's like a cap. So we put a cap or a skull cap over ourselves and we believe that we know. And what is that? That's simply a system which we have put it on ourselves. So we have not really organized our lives. So she says, with no cohesive life of its own and without personality. Of course, there is an external personality, well dressed and all that, impeccable manners. But the true personality, even a mental personality, is not formed. Whatever people say, one believes and one acts according to that. It cannot survive. So, such a personality cannot survive because it's, in fact, not good even for the individual. So, that's why in life, one of the most important things, the significance of one's own choices. That's how personality is formed. It may be, you may want it, but let me decide what is it that I want from that perspective, higher perspective. By want, I don't mean my desires, because there's hardly any truth about that. But what is it that is good for me? It may be good for you, but is it really good for me? So one really looks at it that way. So she says, what made up the mental being dissolves in the mental region when the body, the substance which made up the body, dissolves in the physical substance. So what happens after death? The body dissolves. All of them are formations from, there is a universal physical matter. So out of which the body is formed, it goes back. Ghada chala jata hai with the kumar. So in the mitti. So the pot breaks and it goes into the mud. Similarly, the water which is in the pot, it flows and goes into wherever, back into the mud, or if there's some water somewhere, it will go into that. So same with all the other elements. So the body dissolves here, the vital being dissolves in the vital world. The mental being, because it's hardly organized, it dissolves into the general mass in the mental world. So that's what happens after death. Physical body dissolves slowly through whatever process of time. The vital being, the prana, it dissolves in the vital world, for which there is shraddh ceremony to make it dissolve fast, because the vital world is full of all kinds of things. And especially if one has led a life which is governed by many things of the lower vital nature, then all those beings come and say, come brother, we are waiting for you. And it's a nightmare. But if one has lived at least a vital life, even the vital has lived for something nobler and higher, then there is the so-called heaven of the vital world, where for some time you are greeted and said, okay, stay for a while. But then it dissolves because it's energy melting into energy. Then the mental being, depending on the kind of thoughts, conscious synthesis as the mother puts it, that goes into the mental world. But if one has never really made a conscious synthesis in the world of the realm of the mind also dissolves. So ultimately what goes with us is the soul with the few impressions in a lifetime that it gathered, soul moments as they can be called. These soul moments in the life of an average individual are very, very few. So soul moment has very little to do with the traditional religion. It's not necessary that we may go to a temple and have a soul moment. We may be thinking of the person who is come there, or thinking about my desires, thinking about my own ego satisfaction. So these are not soul moments. Whereas suddenly in the moment, gazing at a landscape, one is filled with the sense of a deep peace and vastness. That is soul moment. So there are many such soul moments which come in our life. Only they are carried because the soul is immortal, and all that it has touched, all that it has taken within itself, that survives. And then she says, the earth's mental atmosphere is filled with beings, mental personalities which lead on entirely independent existence. Even after the disappearance of the body, they can reincarnate in a new body when the soul, that is to say, the true self, reincarnates, thus carrying with it the memory of its previous lives. But at the same time, there are people who have formed a mental personality. In fact, they look for a body because they need to express. Sometimes they can express in somebody else. There is a soul, and they see there is a capacity, and suddenly we see the development of a musical ability of a very unusual kind. And it's because there is a mental personality which suddenly is influencing, and the person begins to suddenly develop painting or musical ability or any such thing. There are many other reasons. This is one of the reasons. Or they continue to project, like beings of the vital worlds and mental world. They continue to project into human beings, pressing them, suggesting things to them. So these things come from all kinds of worlds. If we accept them, so that there again the element of choice comes, because recently there was something very interesting that people often tell me when they are going through depression. So the person was saying, I looked at the fan and suddenly I had this image, and I don't want to give name to that image. But see, how does it come? It comes because there are forces which are projecting onto the person. Next step, if you accept the image, do it. Push to do it. So that's why we should be very careful that every suggestion that comes from this direction or that direction, it doesn't mean it is true. So all this is going on all the time, but there are mental personalities which are waiting. When the soul reincarnates in a new body, they come. That's a very rare phenomena, but it can happen. So then one remembers the previous, carries the memory of the previous lives. But this is not what Sri Aurobindo calls immortality. So this can happen, but this is not what is called as immortality. Immortality is a life without beginning or end, because obviously immortality by its nature. What is mortal? That's why it is said whatever is born dies. What it means is whatever has a beginning has an end. This is the logic. But in this beginning and end, there is something which has no beginning and no end. Now, this is something which our human mind finds difficult to conceive. But very simply, if we take a little backward trail, this entire play is taking place in space and time. So, if we take it, what is the beginning of space and time? Then, logically at least, we can conceive of an existence out of which space and time have emerged, because space and time cannot be just eternally, suddenly there. So even scientists nowadays speak about space-time bubbles. So there is some state, we don't know what name to put it, I mean spiritually one knows, but logically, which is beyond space and time. So there is something which is beyond space and time, which enters into space and time. Now, the moment we realize that, then there is the immortal existence. Because we know immediately that we have always existed and will always exist. So, as the mother says, the moment one realizes the psychic being, that very moment one also discovers immortality. So, the first immortality is to discover that element which is, even before space-time came into existence, it was there. So, in traditional literature, it is called as the Jivatma, Paramatma, Atma. These are the three which are before space and time, they are there. Paramatma is there, the transcendent. Atma is there as the cosmic self. And then the Jivatma is there. It is also there before space and time. But when the play begins, then the Jivatma enters into the play. And that's what becomes the psychic being. But it is always connected with that. So she is speaking of this immortality. First immortality, before we can talk about immortality of the body, is to discover this deathless self. It is called deathless because it has no beginning and no end. It cannot die. By its very nature, it cannot die. It doesn't belong to this domain. There is no power or hold of death over it. Death is given a charge. What is the charge? Whatever is within limits, you can destroy it. And it's in fact inevitable. What is within limits always strives for the limitless, because it is always surrounded by the limitless. That's why no human being can ever be satisfied with the limited. So it strives for the limitless, but it cannot. It does not know how. The way is yoga, but one doesn't know usually. So death comes, says, I know you want limitless. In one lifetime, with a limited body, limited mind, you cannot have it. So then it comes back. So this is how experience grows. So whatever is within limits, death has a hold over it. That's why it's called as transient, temporary. Whatever is beyond limits, the limitless, that cannot be destroyed by death. Death has no right over it. So she speaks about this, that, but this is not what Sri Aurobindo calls immortality. Immortality is a life without beginning or end, without birth or death, which is altogether independent of the body. So, what happens? We often use the word soul is. Who is born? Born simply means that it has accepted a limited formation of body and mind. That is what is meant by soul being born. Because it has no beginning. So, what it means is, there is a very beautiful way it is described in Kathopanishad. Agnir yathaiko bhuvanam pravishto rupam rupam pratirupo babhuva. Again, Vayur yathaiko bhuvanam pravishto. So you have a patra made of mud. So in that mud, or let's take the example of a lamp. So there is a beautiful lamp. But now you have put a bulb there and the lamp is lit. So depending on the material of the lamp shade, it will light up better, or it may not throw sufficient light. So when the outer lamp cracks, does the light also end? No, the light doesn't end. So what happens when the bulb also cracks? No, the light still is there. But it has gone, it is there in the wire and the generator. You put another source, it will come up again. So, same thing applies to the human system. When a baby is born, it doesn't mean the soul is immediately also born with the body. The body is only a formation. Soul is watching over it. Should I? Should I not? It's like, before you buy a plot, you go and see. So the soul is watching. There are several plots. This plot. And how does it decide the plot? Parents. Parents are nice or good. This is the kind of experience I want. I want the experience of richness. Okay, they are rich parents. I want the experience of good, noble sanskar. So here I may get it, etc., etc. So it watches over. Then it says, okay, this plot is fine when the baby is beginning to form in the womb. And when the baby is delivered, the soul still will not enter. In some people, it may never enter. It is just knows, okay, this is my plot. It's like you buy a plot but never build a house and live there. Sometimes simply because that plot is, you bought the plot, but all kinds of hooligans came there. And either you fight or you say it's okay, I'll buy some other plot. It happens, no? So the same thing happens in certain lives, that the body is there, life force is there, mind is there. But the kind of beings that begin to move, the soul says, okay, I won't enter into it. I'll watch over it for some time, then it withdraws. Or else, if it enters, there will be a fight, because there has to be struggle then. So, birth of a body is not synonymous with the soul birth. In fact, soul is never born. It only assumes, enters a human body, forms a contact with it. What it means is, it is tied now to a body and ties itself to the mind. The moment it ties, it forgets its past life, it forgets its immortality. It's like, how people, when they move from one place to another, either through a process of transfer or something, and then they are completely with that environment, that house becomes their own. Then, after some time, when they shift to another house, then some faint memory remains, oh, that house. But now a new house, new arrangement, new neighbors, they become your own people. So the same thing happens here when the soul takes up another body, another formation. Then it gets tied. When it's tied, then everything that is along with it, it gets tied to that. And this tying is important. There is a purpose, but that's not what is being spoken of here. It ties itself to the body. But when the body dies, it does not die, it simply gets untied. So those who are yogis learn to untie it when the body is alive. That's why it is called as to die while you are living. But otherwise, when the time of death comes, death says, okay, you have further, aage jana hai. No, this is mine, this house, these people. It's no, sir, please, come on. So if you resist, then there are, even Upanishad describes 101 knots through which it is tied, because it has to be firmly tied. Every nut, bolt, screw. That's why when mother was asked who are the people who will not have much pain during death, during departure, she says those who have practiced inner detachment. Because then when the moment comes, you'll simply say, hey Pepure, because where are you going? You are going from your office to home. That's all. But otherwise, because the more attached one is, the more the suffering. But the soul is not dying, nor the soul was born. It were bodies that were born, minds that were formed. And the soul tied itself and it can untie. So that's why she is speaking of soul, the immortal self, which is beyond birth and death. And when we learn how to separate these parts, the mind, for example, separate from the body, then even after the death of the body, the mind can continue consciously in other worlds. Similarly, when one becomes conscious of the soul, then there is an independent life after the body dissolves. Still, it continues. Soul anyways has an independent life. The mother speaks of some people whose soul came to her. And strange instances. One was, she speaks about a doctor who, the moment he died, he immediately came and he was so happy. Even one child, after whose death, that little soul came and it was so happy to be thrilled, but the parents were crying. And he says, how can I tell them? In fact, that soul came and is pointing to the mother, give this flower to my parents. Not my parent, but to them. Now, when you look at it from that point of view, when you have that vision, then your responses will be so different. But normally, we are completely identified with the body and the vital. De Atma Bodh. We think the body is the self and therefore we suffer. Then she further qualifies that what is this life without beginning or end? It is the life of the self with a capital S. The essential being of each individual. The true individual, essential being. Essential why? Without it, we won't live long. Even if it just withdraws, then most of the time, for few months, one may continue, usually in a very deranged state. But if, as long as it is watching over, it is enough, it is watching over. So it continues. But the moment it withdraws, life begins to withdraw, mind begins to withdraw, because they realize that there is no more the sanction and the body disintegrates. So this is the essential being, this is our true self, the one essential thing. And it is not separate from the universal self. The other great truth she is revealing is this individual self and the universal self are one. They are one in the sense like the drop and the water in the sea, or the wave and the ocean. So wave is separate, but wave is also one with the ocean. Classical spiritual literature in Vedanta will describe it like that. While the wave is playing, rising, imagine in time-lapse photography, if you make it 50 years, rise and fall. then it is independent and individual. But in the base, it is always connected with the ocean. The day one realizes that it is one formation of this universal self. The day one realizes this universal self, one also realizes that all other waves are also part of the same universal self, but they are having different modes of experience. The bay in the Bay of Bengal, the wave in the Bay of Bengal, the wave in the Arabian Sea, now that, what is that, Biparjoy is coming. Ultimately, they are all drawing their strength from the one universal self. So the same way the individual self is one with the universal self. This doesn't mean there is no difference. Fundamentally there is no difference, but there is a difference in manifestation. The ocean becomes many waves. Each wave has its own beauty, its might, its majesty, its moment through which it goes. And then it comes back to the universal self, rests for some time, goes back into the play. So this is the universal self and the individual self. And when we realize it, then we'll have no fights with each other, because we'll realize that is also away from the whatever fights will be there will only be with the surface being, not with the essential self, because it's the same in everyone. And this essential being has a sense of oneness with the universal self. It is in fact a personified, individualized expression of the universal life, and has neither beginning nor end, neither life nor death. So, does a wave die? No, it goes into the ocean. Does it mean it is death? No, that's its origin. It can die only if the universe dies, if the ocean dies. If the ocean by some magic were to be dried up, then you can say, okay, the waves are dead. Otherwise, they are going and emerging for a new experience. Wave going down here in front of Bay of Bengal may travel, God knows where all, emerge in Sri Lanka. Going down there may emerge, far on the coast of Africa. So this is how this play goes on. Here she is only describing the whole fact of the individual and the universal self, not its purpose, etc., because that's a different subject altogether. Because people derive all kinds of interpretation from this. This is then, it doesn't really matter, but it matters, but that comes later, not in this aphorism. But it's enough to understand that basically our lives are like waves coming from the ocean. It is impelled by the ocean, and if we connect with the ocean, there is no limit to this life, because then we consciously connect with the ocean strength. It exists eternally, and that is what is immortal. When we are fully conscious of this self with a capital S, we participate in its eternal life, and we therefore become immortal. So when we are that essential thing within the wave, which is joined by the sea, when we are conscious of it, then what happens when this formation lapses? It is still conscious, that connecting point. So it knows I have come down into the universal self. It emerges again. It knows I am entering into this play again. So this is what she is reminding us, that when we become one, practically it means that there is in us something which survives death, and that something is always identified with the universal self. Unlike the ego, which is not identified with the universal self. Ego is a limited personality put on for a moment by nature. And nature, how does it do it? Through false identification. That's the bondage. Ignorance. I am this person with this body. I am this person with this degree. I am this person with this capacity. I am this person with this language, custom, tradition. So that identification ties it. Now there is a purpose in all this which we are not talking now, because otherwise this analogy is there in Dvaita Advaita, or rather Visishta Advaita. But then it is used to say that individuality is an illusion. No. The wave is real and the ocean is real. The ocean is not just meaninglessly throwing up waves. Even when we use the word delight, for the sake of delight, but all that is somewhere else. Right now she is only describing what survives. So, when one is fully conscious of this self with a conscious capital S, we participate in its eternal life. It's the life of the ocean in which we participate. It's no more like just my little life. We are, universe has, the ocean has its own life. With all the creatures, beings, its power, we participate in, we can use the word becoming, in the manifestation. And we therefore become immortal. Then she takes up this other aspect. But there is some misunderstanding about the word immortality. And this is not something new. It is a misunderstanding which has recurred very frequently. When one speaks of immortality, most often people understand it as the indefinite survival of the body. So I have heard even sometimes somebody saying, but mother is not there. So once I said little humorously, probably it offended the person. So I said, maybe for you. So I said, what can I say? I can't say that I have discovered her inside. That will look very presumptuous. I said, maybe for you. And that's why people who depend on a master, if they rely only physically, Shobindu repeatedly says, the first thing to do is to discover the master within you. If you don't do it, you will suffer because you are only depending on something which is. And mother kept reminding, I am not just this. This I have taken for a particular work. Life of the ocean. The ocean takes a mighty giant tsunami wave for a purpose. But she knows fully that she is not just this. So if you see only that tidal wave, then after some time you say, oh, where is that? So it's so important to understand. There is an issue in June which has come out, All India Magazine. Nearness to the mother. All these things the mother has spoken of. So, but we think immortality of the body. Those who depend only on the body for their so-called immortality are not even ready to be a high humanity. Forget about becoming a master. Even a high humanity understand that body is nothing, the soul is all. Abhimanyu. Conscious, that's how you can face death. So now she answers this, the body can survive indefinitely only if. So there she takes up this issue of bodily transformation. In the first place, it becomes fully conscious of this immortal self and unites with it. First thing is that even physically, we must be conscious. Even in the physical consciousness, we must be conscious of this immortal self, not lose this awareness. Otherwise, we have this awareness only in some exceptional states. First thing. Identifies with it to the extent of having the same capacity, the same faculty of constant transformation, which would enable it to follow the universal movement. So, if the wave can continue to move the way the ocean is moving and roaring, then the wave will survive. So, this is the body. So that is the challenge, that is the difficulty, because it cannot be an individual body. It has to be a certain number of bodies. The body's rhythms have to change. So what she is describing is, and this is so true if we look at our own life. So people often use this word, Bude ho gaye, age ho gaya. But every person past 60 knows that I am not old. The body is growing old. But the mind, the vital, it is the same. It has the same... everything is the same. But the body, the flesh, it begins to, and if you are identified with your troubles, the knees crackling and the joints creaking, then you say, oh my God, life is difficult. Well, but if you step back, life is the same. Of course, you grow a little wiser and a little foolish. That's a different story. Age can bring both of them. We grow a little wiser because we have gone through the blunders and we know that, okay, this is not the path. At the same time, we grow foolish because we believe whatever path I have followed, everybody should walk the same way. So we become foolish because that's how rigidity sets in. And when rigidity sets in the mind, then even the body rigidity sets in. So it's unable to follow the universal progression. If the body could follow the universal progression, if the mind could follow, then it would live so much more longer. It doesn't mean one will be obliged to stay in the body. One can leave it, but not helplessly as a victim of death. But this is very, very deep. Physical immortality is the crown of the project. Sri Aurobindo spoke about it as few thousand years, because many things have to happen before that. And she's speaking of that. First, discover the immortal self. Let the physical consciousness also know it, unite with it. So the same capacities of the immortal self, the body should develop. Its luminosity, the individual self, the soul within us is always full of joy, full of peace. Even in the physical consciousness, one should experience it. Even the physical consciousness should aspire just as the soul aspires. And the sign of that is that physical body is aspiring for the divine. When physical conditions, whether it's hot or cold, all these do not affect you. That aspiration is so beautifully captured in Mirabai's bhajan. Even her body, physical self, roam, it is aspiring. But we are not ready to hold that love, flame of love, inside this human body. It cannot. Even a little bit of it begins to burn, throw up abnormal phenomena, gets excited, gets depressed, all this. So she's saying, but if it can have those things, then it can follow the universal movement. This is an absolutely indispensable condition if the body is to endure. In fact, the first practice is to teach the body to endure. Otherwise, it is driven by the vital. So teach it to endure. Because the body is rigid, because it does not follow the movement, because it cannot transform itself rapidly enough to constantly identify itself with the universal evolution, it decomposes and dies. So change is the law of life, the body cannot cope with it. Even the mind cannot cope, mind gets rigid. So that is the reason why slowly, because you become what is called as dated. World march has moved forward and you can't. So that's why the tendency in old age is to live in the past. In our time, hamare zamane mein. And it's always good. Your past is always good somehow, for some strange reason. And the future is always bad because it's not what you imagine it to be. But we don't know. If we trust the divine, we should know that through everything he is carrying the march forward in whatever way. So old age sets in when we start looking backward, we become rigid. Somebody has said it a bit humorously. What is old age? When the narrow waist and the broad mind change places. So the waist becomes fat and the mind becomes narrow and rigid. So this is what she is saying, that it should be able to follow the movement. That's why physical culture is so important. Its fixity, its rigidity, this was the last thing Mother was working upon. The fixity which comes due to physical structure, the bones. Every other aspect you can make supple. How to make the bones supple? So she says its incapacity to transform itself makes its destruction necessary so that its substance may return to the general realm of physical substance, and so that the body may be remolded into new forms in order to become capable of further progress. And we can take an example that if you have some, old time, people who have a lot of money, it's a different thing altogether. But otherwise, people used to have a सोने का कंगन जो दादी ने दिया था. And then after some time, that time they kept it. Then they realized that, it's out of fashion. So, but they can't just give it to the, goldsmith and say, make it new. He said, no, I have to first dissolve it. So they used to, what did he do? He would burn it. This is the same process, no, which happens. So when you burn, the essential thing survives, the rest goes away. So then, gold comes back to its original form. And then from that form, it again molds into a better shape, which now you have conceived that this is a better shape. So same thing happens with the body and of course the mind, that after some time they become rigid. But at the same time the soul wants something which is more plastic, more supple. And therefore the body dissolves and it goes into the physical, general physical substance, and then a new body comes. But usually, when one speaks of immortality, people think of physical immortality. It goes without saying that this has not yet been realized. So emphasis is on the word yet. The mother at no point says it cannot be realized. She says it has not yet been realized. There are different degrees to which it is being realized. For instance, till the subtle physical, maybe something still more material, closer to the physical matter. Between the subtle physical and the physical, there is other small layers, but not fully realized. Sri Aurobindo says that it is possible and even that it will happen. But he lays down one condition: the body must be supramentalized. It must have some of the qualities of the supramental being, which are qualities of plasticity and constant transformation. Here, plasticity is not the ability to be like rubber, though that also is something very nice if that rigidity can break. But plasticity means that the organs and everything within can completely adapt to the way things change. And I think all this so much nowadays change, air travels, the body is learning to adapt. It is developing a certain degree of widening and plasticity. Because without that it cannot. Earlier it used to be so difficult when people went from one village to another which was a little far. It was difficult, and people say that कि वहाँ का आटा नहीं हजम होता. They go look back to their own chakki का आटा. That degree of fixity used to be there. But now slowly nature is working upon us to make the body little more plastic. These are unconscious processes, but it can become consciously supple and plastic. And when Sri Aurobindo writes that the body is only an instrument and a shadow, he is speaking of the body as it is now and will probably continue to be for a long time to come. So in this vision, the immortal self within is the original true self, the essential. Then we have the mental personality and the other parts, and then we have the body, which is an instrument. So body is nothing but, say, the flute of the flute player. So if the flute breaks, doesn't mean the flute player is dead. Or it is the harmonium of the person who is playing the harmonium. So if the harmonium is broken, it doesn't mean that the player, the one who was singing on it, is gone. Musician is gone. Or we can take modern analogy that we have the computer, the hardware, the software, and the skinware. So skinware is the soul within. The software is the mind, which has programmed, and the hardware is the body. So even when the hardware breaks, the software exists somewhere. And you can put it in another PC. And even if the software goes, if the skinware is lost, if the skinware, because it has come from there, the soul, it can bring out even a new program and put it into the system, a new and better program. So this is the way he explains. Body is an instrument and a shadow for now. But in times to come, just like today, now computers are becoming independent, so to say, of the skinware. Only at the original something has to be done. After that, so it is a shadowy way of something which is a reflection of something which in its origin, because nature put some signs. A day will come when the body itself will have its own independent divine life. Independent in the sense it will be suffused by the divine light and divine glory. Right now it cannot. Without the life force, it's dead. Without the mind, it does not know where to go. So when we wake up in the morning, the mind has to direct the body. Go to the washroom. And then the life says, yes, yes, yes. But when the body is divinized, these intermediary agents will no more be needed. It will move by a direct divine impulsion. Not only that describes it beautifully. Some people develop it, for instance, by what is called as the sporting instinct. It gets into the body. So similarly, the body can directly be moved by an intuition within. Actually, animals have it, but that's given for a limited purpose, which is called a instinct. But through evolution, we will have an intuitive or intuitivized body before the supramental body. So the body itself will have a direct knowledge. It won't need the mind, and it will have access to the universal energy which can help it move. So she says that for some time it will continue this way. It is only the instrument of the self with a capital S, a very inadequate expression of this self and a shadow. So right now it is not perfect. The soul within may even, it's like somebody who has learned music straight away from Shiva, music and dancing from Shiva and Krishna. But none of the instrument can play it. You can pick up a flute and blow it, but it's not the same as Krishna's flute. It's the same flute and yet different flute. When Krishna plays, the world comes running because that is the power he has breathed into the flute. When Shiva dances, the worlds go tumbling down or new things are created. So one may learn all this, but one may not be able to replicate because this instrument is not ready. It's a shadow. But it must become. That's how it should be. That the dress must be worthy of the wearer. So the wearer is divine representative. And what is the dress which we are wearing? So she says it will happen one day. Right now it is inadequate, a shadow, something vague and obscure in comparison with the light and precision of the eternal self. Body is obscure, dull in its capacities, limited, prone to disease, suffering, disintegration, death, old age. And finally, we'll stop here with this question. We'll take part 2 of this aphorism for the answer. Now the question she raises is how this shadow, the instrument, can serve the development of the soul, and how by cultivating the instrument one can be of help to future lives are questions which are not without interest. They're not given here in this aphorism, but the mother takes up. Okay, it's an obscure instrument. Still it's an instrument. So what do we do? Can it help us for future lives? How we can develop it so that it can become at least a reasonably good instrument? So she says these are questions we will take up. She'll take up in the same aphorism as continuation, which will continue in the next class. Thank you. Namaste.